Hey, Hots. So, in lesson 3, again, we're trying to determine the number of things without actually counting them. Um, we're going to talk about molar mass. Okay. One way to count numbers of things is by knowing how much one of the things weigh, how much mass it has, and then taking that and converting it over into the grams or whatever it is that you want to find. So we're going to talk about how do we come up with that molar mass, especially for things that are like compounds. Okay, so at the end of this lesson, you will be able to calculate the molar mass of an element or a compound. Okay. So remember, we measure reactants and products as mass in grams and or volume in milliliters, right? Those were the two things that we used outside of just individual things, okay? But chemical equations are written in numbers of atoms and molecules, right? H2O, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, right? They're not written in grams and milliliters. So how do we determine how much of one substance can react with a given amount of another substance to give us the amount of product that we want? For example, how do the aspirin manufacturers know how much of each ingredient to put in so that they can get 100 capsules or something like that? Okay, so we use a standard dimension to quantify substances. So our standard dimension, right, our standard is called the mole. Okay, and the mole is defined as the number of atoms in exactly 12 grams of carbon 12. Okay, so remember, carbon 12 would be carbon with 6 neutrons. Okay, and so how many atoms of carbon are there in exactly 12 grams of that, right? And so what the definition ends up with is that there are 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd atoms, right? Or particles. So 1 mole is 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd particles. We call this Avogadro's number, right? It's the number of particles in 1 mole of a substance. Okay. And really, honestly, all you need to know is just that number, right? We're not going to do anything really with it. You just need to know that a mole is a number, right? Much like a dozen is a unit, right? A dozen is a unit that represents 12, right? An hour is a unit that represents 3,600 seconds. A mole is a number that represents 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd particles. Okay. So the mole can be used to relate masses and volumes of substances to the quantity of atoms. Okay. So to convert from atoms or molecules to grams or liters, we need to know the molar mass of the substance. Okay. The molar mass of the substance is the mass of a given chemical. Okay. Whether it be an element or a compound, divided by the amount of the substance. Okay. So the, the grams of a given chemical divided by the amount of the substance, which is the mole. How many moles? Okay. In other words, the molar mass is the conversion factor between grams and moles. So when you calculate the molar mass, you're calculating the conversion factor for that compound that has something like this many grams equals this many moles. Okay. Rather than a table, the molar mass of a substance has to be calculated. Okay, so there isn't a table out there that says, H2O is this number and, NH4 is this number or whatever. You need to calculate it. Here's how. It's pretty simple. First, start with the correct chemical formula for the substance, right? I want, in this case, I want water, so I wrote H2O. Had I wanted hydrogen peroxide, remember that would be H2O2. Okay, so make sure that your formula for that compound is correct. Okay, then determine the mass of each atom contained in the chemical. So H2O has hydrogen and oxygen. If we look on our periodic table and we look at the mass, we find that hydrogen says its mass is 1.01. And we're always going to record the molar mass to the 100th, right? So 2 decimal places. Okay, so hydrogen is 1.01, and there are 2 of them, so I'm going to multiply by 2. Oxygen has a mass of 16.00, right? And so then we're going, and there's only 1 of them, then we're going to add them together, right? So this is going to give me 2.02 plus 16 equals 18.02. That is your molar mass. Okay, so how much does one atom have? What is the mass of one atom? Multiply it by how many atoms there are of that type, and then add it to the same idea of the next one and the next one and the next one till you have all of them together. Okay. Here are some examples. This is one where it's just calcium. We wanted to know what the molar mass of calcium is. All we have to do is look on the periodic table. On our periodic table, right underneath the word calcium, it says 40.08. That is the mass, right? So we're going to write the mass here. Since there's no other molecule or no other molecules or no other atoms, we're just going to leave it that way, 40.08, and then we're going to put grams per mole. So that's the same as saying 1 mole is equal to 40.08 grams of calcium. Okay, here's another one. This one is sodium chloride, table salt. So we have sodium and we have chlorine. So sodium has 22.99, right? So that's the number at the bottom, 22.99. We're going to write that here. And then chlorine is 35.45. So we're going to write that right next to it. And then we're going to add those 2 together. When we add them together, we get 58.44. Remember, we're always going to go out to that second decimal. And then we write grams per mole. So that means that there are 58.44 grams in 1 mole of sodium chloride. Okay, so you should be able to calculate the molar mass of an element or a compound.